but we have got Kanterian from the University of Kent online now. Afterwards he has to go to class. So I'll ask you to stay for a little bit longer until we establish the connection. I have a brief conversation with Edward Kanterian, who is obviously a first name Armenian, but also German descent, living in Britain and in Belgium. I told the audience that you are both Armenian and German descent, born in Bucharest, living in between Great Britain and Belgium. And yeah, as we established, remember this was one of our first conversations when we met more than 10 years ago.
Yes.
What makes you consider yourself to be an Armenian? Yes, more or less. What makes you or me Armenian? Because we don't speak the language, we don't go for the Armenian customs, and still we consider that we have this identity.
Yes, it's a very interesting question. So when you asked me, was not quite sure how to answer it. Not quite sure how to answer it now. I would not say that I consider myself first and foremost an Armenian. I consider myself first and foremost a human being, a citizen of the world, really. And then I consider myself a European, and then more specifically, of course, an Eastern European, a German, and an Armenian. So it's there are lots of layers, and in my particular case, I'm also now referred to as a British philosopher, English philosopher, and I have a child who is British. My wife is Hungarian, and we live in Brussels, but I work in it's very complicated, and my family history is even more complicated because my father was Armenian, 100% Armenian, but he was born in Romania himself, and to a large extent I perceived him as a Romanian as well, not just as an Armenian. And my mother's side is even more complicated because she is both German, or of German descent, but also of Romanian descent, and Polish and Russian, because she was born in Bessarabia. So it's a very complex story. But why do I consider myself an Armenian to an important extent? So I don't know whether you had a chance in your conference to talk about Margalit's book, Avishai Margalit's book, The Ethics of Memory. So he makes a distinction there between ethics and morality, between an ethical community, belonging to a community which is purely ethical, which consists in having personal relations to individual human beings, and via those individual human beings you partake in a larger community. And the second thing, belonging to the community of humanity, which is a moral community. In that second case, of course, we do not participate in that community by having relations to individual human beings, because I do not have relations to all human beings in Africa or South America or anywhere else in the world, only to a very small subset of human beings. Nevertheless, this distinction is very important between ethics and morality. So initially, of course, since I was raised and I grew up in Romania and Bucharest, to some important extent within the Armenian community, I slowly took it with my mother's milk, or my father's milk in this case, the Armenian identity. I was taught Armenian, it's just that I didn't cultivate it and I've forgotten it, and it's an ongoing project of mine to pick it up again at some point. But these relations, these intimate, close relations that I had with members of my family, with people in the Armenian community in Bucharest. I remember we would go to the church, almost every Sunday we would go to the church, and then after the Mass would end, we would still socialize. Armenians would get out of the church and socialize with one another. You probably want to also remember, no doubt, something very similar. The church had an important dimension of, one could say, of gathering together the spirit of a community. In a secular time, this is getting more and more difficult to cultivate that, unless you then have some other sort of connections, such as via language or via culture, shared culture. This is less so in Germany, where I spend much of my life, and less so also in the United Kingdom, simply because there are not enough Armenians. I don't know how it's like in Bucharest, in Romania. I understand there are not many Armenians around, but the community is thriving to some extent. In the United States, by contrast, and in France, the community is very strong. So numbers matter a lot, and they can cultivate identity even in secular times because simply of the numbers and the partaking in the cultural framework which comes with it. So I think that's very important. And then the other reason why I consider myself an Armenian is because I, of course, became aware of the genocide, of the Armenian genocide. So in my case, my family suffered from the genocide, so it's a deep trauma within my family which has been traded over the generations, and slowly, as I was growing up as a child and as a teenager, this thread and this never forgotten memory of this trauma became more and more important to me. And in fact, and that's a very interesting and maybe strange paradox of memory in general, of historical memory in general, the further I'm moving away in time from the event, and this holds also for many other Armenians throughout the world, the more important this event is becoming. I just want to point out that last year we had 100 years of the commemoration of the genocide. As you probably have become aware, all over the world, but especially in the United States and also in France, there have been very large-scale demonstrations and in which young Armenians have partaken. So a trauma can also then be a trauma that initially affects just an ethical community, to come back to the distinction between, Magalit's distinction between ethics and morality, which initially affects just an ethical community in the Armenian case, or the Jews in the case of the Holocaust, etc., can then be transferred and transformed into something relevant for the moral community, I mean for the community of mankind, for the whole species, if the trauma is gigantic enough, if it's terrible enough, if it's tragic enough, then indeed it can become important enough for the whole of mankind. So Magalit tries to argue in this sense as well. And then, of course, my partaking in the ethical community of the Armenians translates, or has translated over time, and this is an ongoing process even for myself, into a sort of duty to let the community of mankind know about this particular tragedy. So I'm considering myself like a sort of communicator and a sort of mediator between my more confined ethical community and the community of mankind at large. So there we can distinguish on the one hand between the ethical community and the moral community on the other hand, but as an individual belonging to the ethical community, you can acquire moral duties that you then have to translate at the general level of the whole species. And I think this is happening not just for us, this is happening for other communities as well, which have experienced this sort of tragedies. Fortunately, not all communities have, but those who have, I think, have to live up to this task and to this duty. So this would be roughly an attempt to answer why I consider myself an Armenian. I'm just looking at your questions again. Yes, we also discussed the fact that I published, I don't know whether you had the time to introduce me at all, but I edited and translated a book by a famous Romanian Jewish writer Michael Sebastian.
I was going to ask you about this, yes.
Okay, yes. Want to ask me?
No, actually, I remember when I first encountered your name, it was in an interview in the 22 magazine, the Revista 22, where you were interviewed exactly about this translation of Michael Sebastian's diary into German. And for this translation and the critical approach of this translation, you were awarded an important prize in Germany. And I remember that when you were granted the prize, you were asked if you're Jewish. Why did you translate this book? Were you Jewish?
Yes. So just to make a small correction, I did not myself receive directly the prize. But the prize is always given for the book itself and the author. So basically, I accepted the prize on behalf of Michael Sebastian together with his surviving family members. So it was a more symbolic acceptance of the prize in itself. But and then the second thing, when I received the prize in Munich, I think this was in 2006 or 7, and I was not asked whether I am a Jew. There were several confusions there. So in my own thank you speech, I related an encounter that I had with a Romanian anti-Semite in 1991, when I was a very young person, in Romania, in Târgu Jiu to be more specific. So I was sitting there in a garden with several other young people, and we were drinking a little bit of wine. We started politicizing, and yes, I think the name of Petre Roman came up, the then Prime Minister of Romania. And I said that I consider him a rather intelligent man. I mean, I didn't know very much about Romanian politics back then. And then immediately my assertion was criticized on the basis that Petre Roman is a Jew. And that's an a priori refutation, isn't it? If somebody is a Jew, if somebody is an Armenian, if somebody is black or gay, they must be mistaken, they cannot be trusted. So then, so I recounted this affair, and I was defending in 1991, you know, being young and rather passionate about this, and of course very upset coming from Germany, with a German background, with the German guilt on my shoulders, coming to Romania, back to Romania, and being approached in such a direct way, facing anti-Semitism, which was unheard for me in Germany, where I spent my teenagehood and my high school. I was very upset, so we had a big argument about that, at the end of which this guy simply asked me, "Are you a Jew?" I mean, how is it possible, how come that you are defending the Jews? This was for him unconceivable that somebody who is not a Jew can defend the Jews. So I recounted this story in my thank you speech in Munich in 2006 when this book that I translated, this Holocaust, partly a Holocaust diary, I translated. And what was also funny is that in the laudatio of the mayor of Munich, Christian Ude, so a politician of the Social Democrats, of the German Social Democrats, a man of liberalism, no question about that. He, in his laudatio, referred to me as Edward Kanterian the Jew. So that was the second misunderstanding, after which came my thank you speech, and in my thank you speech, I explained I'm not a Jew, but not in reply to Christian Ude, but in reply to that young Romanian in 1991. So this was the second misunderstanding. Now the really interesting question, to come back to your question, is why did the mayor of Munich confuse me with a Jew? Because it's not the case that in Germany, if you are defending the Jews or you are discussing the tragedy of the Jews, you are immediately considered a Jew. On the contrary, there it's more or less an accepted duty of Germans, of critical Germans at least, not nationalist Germans, but critical Germans, and I think most of them are, to discuss the Holocaust and to discuss the German guilt and assume the German guilt. So why did Christian Ude assume that I'm a Jew? This is an interesting question. My answer to that is because he realized or assumed, sorry, he assumed that I am not a German, okay? Because I don't have a German name. Edward Kanterian is not a German name. I translated the book from Romanian to German, so he assumed, obviously, that I'm Romanian. On the basis of that, he assumed that that's a German prejudice, that to not be German does not imply that you have a duty to talk about the Holocaust, as if other nations have not contributed to the Holocaust. But of course they have, and unfortunately also our beloved Romanian nation has contributed to the Holocaust. So he was not aware of that at all, and for this reason he mistook me for a Jew. There were two confusions here involved, a double confusion, that I'm not a German, I am a German, I have a German passport. According to the current definition of being a German, you are a German if you are a citizen, not if you have German blood. Yeah, we have departed from that definition of being a German. So he was wrong in that respect, and because he assumed that only Germany has a guilt, has a historical guilt with respect to the Holocaust. And then finally, very recently, just a few weeks ago, I was having a chat with an English colleague here at Canterbury, who is also a good friend of mine and also a man of liberalism. And we were discussing the Arab-Israeli conflict. And I tend to be, unlike many British academics, slightly more on the Israeli side than the Palestinian side. And he asked me out of the blue, Eddie, are you a Jew? I was utterly shocked by this, because I would have never expected this question, to be asked this sort of question in this context. But you see, contexts shift, and so do the historical contexts which embed them. And because of that, this question, and then the identities, or the perception of the identity that you have shift with this shifting perspectives and shifting, if you want, historical tectonic plates. So now all of a sudden, I'm treating maybe more people here think I'm a Jew. I'm not sure. More people, because I'm slightly more on the Israeli than Palestinian side. I'm trying to be, of course, charitable and understand both sides very well, but I am slightly more on the Israeli side. At least I do not consider Israel to be a fascist state, as many people do. Yeah. Okay. And has this answered a bit your question? Any of your questions?
Yeah, the love next to me belongs to Felicia Waldman. I don't know if you know her personally. And next to Felicia is Camelia Crăciun, who's saying hi. Yes, it did answer our question, and thank you for addressing such personal issues at the end of the day, because you basically told us the story of your family, and I know that it's much more complicated. And yes, I do remember our first conversation. I don't know if you remember when we corresponded for something like half a year for official reasons and an official conference, and we were politely addressing each other with doctor, professor, so on and so forth.
Yes.
when we first met, you looked at me and you said, "My name is Jedward." And I was impressed because you pronounced it in Armenian and not in English or German.
Right. So I was treating you obviously as a pure Armenian, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes. So that's why when I remembered all this, I got the idea of asking you what actually makes you an Armenian. So
yes.
Thank you so much for
yes.
being with us.
So do you need anything else from me, or?
No, we don't. We will need you maybe for a workshop in February or March in Bucharest, as discussed. And the paper. Felicia says next to me, and the paper.
Okay, all right, good. Well, thank you very much,
and
wish you great success with your conference.
Thank you so much, and see you next year, hopefully.
Take care.
Bye-bye.